It's the tail end of the Wild West, right? So it's still the Wild West. You can still get shot in a saloon, right? So it's still wild. What it's all about is finding these little hacks that make you quite a lot of money. And basically these hacks are open for a certain amount of time and then they usually get closed. On the 31st, the most profitable ad monetization hack currently is getting killed. A lot of people are nervous.
Welcome to Games Growth with Upptic, a podcast about the discipline of scaling digital games. We speak with industry experts and investigate trends to highlight strategies, technology, and tactical methodologies to profitably grow your game to massive global audiences. If you're interested in learning more, visit us at upptic.com. My name is Xander Agosta, Director of Marketing here at Upptic, and joining me today are my co-host,
Warren Woodward, co-founder of Upptic.
And our guest,
Felix Braberg, mostly on the 2.5 Gamers podcast, but also an ad monetization consultant.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us, Felix. I'm very excited to have a professional podcaster with us.
Also really excited about our topic today. Somehow we've done this podcast for now several years, and we've never talked about ad monetization and game monetization in general. It seems like a massive gap.
That's the big issue. Like, one things that ads is a dirty word. Like, it's 23% roughly of our industry revenue. And there's a lot of interesting things happening. And ads are beautiful. Like I say on 2.5 Gamers quite a lot. So happy to talk about ads.
Awesome. Super excited to dig in with you today.
Cool. Let's just jump right in. For the folks who don't know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how that leads into your involvement in ad monetization?
Yeah, so I started in the industry about 7 years ago. I worked in 2 DSPs, and then I made the jump to work in a network. That network, maybe some people say honest broker, some people say yeah. So basically, I was a DSP in a network, and without knowing it, that's the 2 main components of demand that actually feed into ad monetization. So when you see ads in mobile games, the people that are paying to put those ads or facilitating that money or the money transfer is either a DSP or an ad network. So little did I know, I was preparing myself for a career in ad monetization that just happened. I made the jump basically to do ad monetization from the network, and I haven't looked back since. Started with smaller games, got a big break working at network, managing the ad monetization for Tetris. And the thing about ad monetization is it really gets fun, and you can start doing a lot of funky stuff when it's over like 30 or 40K a day. And that's when you can really start playing around with it. And then that's when you can really hone in and perfect your craft. So that's what I did. And then just started getting clients. And here I am, a podcast and a lot of clients later.
Awesome. Thanks for the context. Most of this conversation, I want to talk about what is AdMon, how it works, what are the key levers and vectors of AdMon, how it's changed over time, what the future looks like. But can you talk briefly at the top just about what a typical engagement with one of your clients looks like so we get an understanding what the day-to-day of ad monetization is? Yeah.
So I can tell you that 3 main ways I usually work with clients. And the first one is the really big ones. So I think the ones that are earning 150 to 200K a day. That's more of an ongoing engagement. You do A/B tests, you test new partners, you get ideas, ad placements. That's like a running, ongoing, forever engagement. Then also there's another type of engagement. Someone's earning maybe like $1,000 to $2,000 a day, that want to improve it. And then basically I come in for about 2-3 months and work with them for ad placements and hone in the ad stack to basically get the gains. And then there's also another one that's quite common these days where it's just a team saying, like, we don't know how to do ad monetization, but we want to have it in-house to have that value inside of our company. So let's bring in Felix to teach him how it works. And then I work with them for a month and a half, just doing some seminars, working with them, train someone up. And those are the 3 main things. There's kind of a 4th one now as well, which is subscription apps that I've been reaching out. About 30% of my business now is just subscription apps that I've reached out that want to get a piece of the ad revenue and diversify their revenue. So that's something I'm noticing a lot lately.
Do you attribute that trend to anything? The increase in subscription apps?
I think it's just people are starting to realize that ad revenue can actually be a significant, if you get it right, you can actually earn quite significant amount of player ad ARPDAU or ARPDAU if you do it properly, especially like lately with the eCPMs that you see on rewarded video, and eCPMs have just been increasing over time. Usually the people that are the quickest movers is the gaming companies, and then it kind of trickles down to the app companies afterwards. So yeah, because the gaming competition is so fierce. I think it's just the right time.
Also, I think you talked about the right time. We talked a little bit about App Store launches with 08, Premium, and there's this whole era of figuring out how ad monetization works. Can you talk us a little bit, what are those different eras of ad monetization and what the evolution has been up to this point?
Yeah, so we've gone from an era around like 2014, 2015, when like ad monetization started becoming a thing. There was one mediation provider, MoPub, and Then it was pretty much the Wild West, like completely crazy. Fake ads, click stack. It was just crazy. So back then it was just a free for all. Have you played Red Dead Redemption 2? Like that tail end of the Wild West? It's still wild, but it's getting cleaned up. So
Great metaphor.
Yeah, it's perfect. I think it's exactly like nail on the head. It's still the Wild West, but not as crazy as it used to be. So yeah, that's a good way of putting it, I think. The main things that have changed is the market has gone more consolidated with big players that are a bit more honest than the brokers of 2016, 2017, when you start working with someone and sometimes they would just stack 4 or 5 rewarded ads on top of each other and line up the click button. So when your users pressed one button, it was like 5 impressions. And that was quite a common practice back then. And then you got blocked. And yeah, it sucked for you. That doesn't happen that much anymore. Now the Wild West stuff that happens is networks. Having been in a network, I can tell you that sometimes, maybe a lot of the time, they don't adhere always to the rev share that's stated in your agreement. I'm not going to name names, so
interesting.
Don't go there.
Kind of the wild thing we all suspect, but you've been behind, I don't want to say behind enemy lines.
Well, you can't prove it, right? So yeah.
We've definitely seen trends like that. There'll be times where it's just like months of consistent performance with, I won't name any specific network. And then we just see like everything across the board, all pubs kind of dips in an equivalent way. Sometimes we have to go inside of the building and be like, hey, did anything change? And then things kind of magically get back to normal.
Yeah, exactly. The more established networks don't do this as much anymore or at all, I think, anymore. But I'm sure some of the other networks still do. It's definitely a practice that still exists because if they tweak a little bit and move up from that 30% to maybe 33%, that's every day ticking in. That's a lot of money, right?
One of the things that AdMon is a key component of the overall way that we bring games to market and generate revenue. Can you talk a little bit about how the importance has changed over time? And I think you made a comment a few minutes ago about 23%. Can you give us a little insight about how the importance of AdMon has changed over time and what kind of game design impact has that had across the industry?
Yeah. So my kind of view on this is that ad monetization allows for our ecosystem to exist. So if we start there, the App Stores and Google Play Store, the App Store and Google Play Store, it's terrible for discovery, like absolute garbage. There's no way you can figure this out because simply there's not enough space on your phone to keep finding apps. What is it? I heard this statistic, 5,000 apps get added every day to the Play and App Stores. There's no way you can keep that up in a good way. The only way that you can allow users in the app stores to find other apps is through showing ads in other apps. So basically, ad monetization allows the facilitation for our whole ecosystem to work. I can say in an idealistic way that if you allow ad monetization or ads in your apps, you're helping the whole ecosystem grow, which is true. So how has it changed over time? 2015, 2016, that's when you were actually able to first make decent money monetizing your games with ads. So that's when it started. And that push for that was the rewarded video. The rise of the rewarded video changed everything. It's opt-in, so advertisers are willing to pay a higher price for it, and you watch something for 30 seconds. So it's not intrusive like an interstitial, and it's not tiny and misclicks like banners. The rise of the rewarded video was the first thing that changed everything. And on the tail end of that, eCPMs grew because conversion rates on rewarded video is amazing. Then you had playables that came in, and that just improved eCPMs even more. That gave rise to hyper casuals being able to be a thing. Suddenly you could do this arbitrage between CPI and LTV, 95% ad revenue, and you could just spam people with ads. The other thing that I would say is probably the biggest thing that changed the most for ad monetization is one game that sparked the whole new genre, and that's Idle Tycoon. That was the first idle miner game, and that just sparked a whole new way of thinking about how rewarded ads work. Rewarded ads is the king of advertising on mobile. If you crack mobile rewarded ads, you can actually unlock quite a lot of growth potential. So what you say in ad monetization right now is that if you can get an ad viewer rate of 70%, so 70% of your user base watch a rewarded ad, and also get that user base to watch at least 7 rewarded ads. If you assume a normal retention curve over 14 days, that will mean that you will generally earn, assuming like a tier 1, tier 2 geo mix, that will mean that you will earn typically anywhere between $1.20 to $1.50 in player LTV. And if you have a bit of IAPs with that, that starts being really monumental towards your overall player LTV. That's how ad monetization works. So yeah, the name of the game.
Yeah, thanks, Felix. That's super insightful. And I think a super high level thing that I see teams not internalizing enough, which is with the average setup of the measurement provider we see with developers, they're counting $1 of IAP, they're counting $1 of in-app revenue. And at a high level, they're thinking about those the same way. For most games, unless you're super small, that dollar of IEP only actually represents 70 cents in the real world, the way you see it in your MMP. But that dollar of ad revenue comes in as it is. What shows up is what you take home. And that's a nuance that can be quite meaningful that I think a lot of teams get lost in the sauce and don't think about, that those $2 should not be valued the same way.
Ad revenue is beautiful because there's no Apple or Google tax. So that's great. The downside of ad revenue is you get bad ads sometimes, annoying end cards, which affects your retention. But also on the tail end of that, some of the payment terms, Apple and Google pay you in 30 days, right? But if you're a small developer, what you get is either net 60 sometimes with some networks, net 50, net 45, which sucks. And then you really have to get a certain scale to, for example, leverage your scale, for example, with a network like Unity. They love that net 60. Like, it's really hard. You have to be really big to get that moving down to net 30. So that's the cons, I guess, with ad revenue.
That makes a lot of sense. You said something earlier, which I think is like an interesting thing just to highlight. You talked about how discovery is terrible on Android and on iOS. What's really funny to me, at least, is this is solved on PC. If I go on Steam, I get an endless brigade of really high quality games that are exactly the genre and type of game that I want to play, and I spend hundreds or thousands of dollars a year buying. And so this is a solvable problem by the app stores. They just haven't, because it hasn't been necessitated, because we have this whole app ecosystem that's floated engagement. Do you think that's a fair read, or am I oversimplifying this?
I don't know. Like, how would you solve discoverability on Play and the App Store?
I think you do aggressive recommendations, right? Like, that's what Steam does. They just do incredibly aggressive recommendations. They have a deep understanding of my usage because of how much I engage with that platform. And like, to be clear, I engage my phone far more than I do with Steam.
Yeah, I think it depends too, who do they think they're solving for? As an iOS user, I'm more focused and aware of their curation, but for the end user, it's clearly not optimal. And for the developer, it's clearly not optimal. But from Apple's perspective, they take this, they call it like the indie record store model of, hey, these are the games we think you should care about. Not so much about your preferences. Here's the things that we have curated from on high that you should really care about.
Let's put on our tinfoil hats here. And like on iOS, I don't think they're interested to solve this problem because they have solved it with Apple search ads. If you want to get recommended, you can just pay Apple to display your ads and then they earn money. So that's a tinfoil hat theory or hypothesis, which could be correct.
Yeah, with Apple, I'm always very curious, and I've in the past swayed really hard towards they're just doing it maliciously, and now I'm not sure if it's like maliciously, or I don't know if incompetence is the right word, or just like we just don't really give a shit what anybody else thinks.
I don't know, like in Apple, I think there's a lot of clever people there. I know a lot of people who work there. They're not dumb, right? I just think it's hard not being inside of that organization to know what is driving their thinking, and I think everything makes perfect sense if you get in there and if you're on Team Apple. Yeah, but I can't really, since I don't know enough about it, I can't put myself in the shoes of Team Apple, but I'm sure it makes sense completely.
At Apple, I don't think it's malicious. I think they really, at least historically, believe heavily in curation of, we want to make sure that a user has a great experience. And our version of that is to highly curate that and dictate a little bit more what that experience is going to be like for them. So I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I think that's where it comes from.
Can you say anything more meaty? Or
absolutely not. Yeah.
I think one of the really interesting things I want to dig into with you, Felix, is just the fact that you have a lot of understanding of what's changing the ecosystem right now. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about other monetization trends. Felix, to you, and if you have thoughts, to jump in here. During the rise of AdMon, what are other monetization mechanisms and tactics that we've seen rise in parallel to AdMon?
There's three main buckets, and I think we've touched on all of them. We're focusing heavily, I think, on mobile for this conversation today. So if you have a mobile product, I'd say there's 3.5, which is premium is not really a thing outside of like a small niche of apps. So we're looking at in-app purchase, ad revenue. Felix mentioned subscription, which I would say is probably the fastest growing as far as like a percentage of the app ecosystem. I don't have the data on this, so please correct us if we are wrong about that. And then the one that I'm calling a half is all the Web3 stuff, because no one's really figured that out yet, but it is a revenue stream outside of the other three that can be part of the pie.
But Apple took that out at its knees as well. When you can't have any in value for any of the NFTs, Apple even had a quite interesting product, but I believe Apple just took it out at the knees when you can't actually get any in-store or in-game like value or like boosters for it. And then you're like, oh, damn it.
There's different teams. Some are working within the lines of Apple's policy, which you really have to decode. And there's others that have figured out, not to put anyone on blast, but what Apple will and won't look at, and are just going down the roads of the things they know that Apple won't look at.
So Web3 stuff is really, really fascinating to Warren and our team, and that's the thing that we are deeply focused on right now. More to come on that. Let's talk about present tense, a state of ad monetization in games. So Felix, you talked a little bit about the history. Talk about what is the state of play today, And then from there, we can bridge into sort of what are the changes that we see coming over there.
Like I said before, it's the tail end of the Wild West, right? So still the Wild West, you can still get shot in a saloon, right? So it's still wild. So ad monetization, what it's all about is finding these little hacks that make you quite a lot of money. And basically these hacks or things or ideas are open for a certain amount of time, and then they usually get closed. So right now, we're in a place where we're moving from a waterfall setup, which has been the big talk for the last 3-4 years, moving to header bidding from a purely waterfall setup. So right now we are in what we call the hybrid age, which is placements and bidders. So not all networks have perfected their bidders to launch them. And we're in a place where I believe that probably by Christmas or at latest Q1 next year, we'll be completely moved to header bidding. Mm-hmm. Nothing personifies this more than Google's latest announcement that on the 31st of October of this year, they will move completely all third-party bidding from placements to their bidder.
This is important. So can you explain in intricate detail for the uninitiated, what is the difference between these?
Instead, basically what this means is that you're taking power away from the publisher and giving it to the demand side of the networks. So before, you used to essentially set up something called a waterfall, where you set up price calls with different networks, like interlocking, going from $1,000 all the way down to $1, whatever. That ensured that you were calling at certain price points. But now this will be programmatically decided in an auction. And how it works right now is that most mediations, you have a header bidding, like whereas 3 or 4 networks that bid together. Mm-hmm. And what happens there is the highest price then travels down the waterfall to find essentially if that price can be beat. So the waterfall will go away and everything will be solved as a header bidder. Mm-hmm. So basically, it hasn't happened fully yet, right? So with the hybrid setup, it still forces the header bidders to be quite high. No one really knows what's going to happen. The networks are saying that everything is going to be fine. You're still going to get the highest price. Cynics say this will be a race to the bottom because there's nothing ensuring that these bidders will keep bidding high. Slowly over time, it's going to trickle down. The big concern that's going on right now, which is on every ad monetization, is like right in front of their mind and why everyone's freaking out for November, is that the delta between Google bidding and placements is still really high on an eCPM level. So that means that right now, you're getting usually 50 or 60% higher eCPMs on AdMob placements compared to the Google bidder. And this is big news because Google tends to be between 40 to 60% of developers' revenue. So people are quite nervous. If you decrease 40% of your revenue by 50%, that's not good. Google's kind of official line is these kinks will be worked out. There won't be that much of a delta moving forward. I'm not convinced. Maybe they'll pull it off. We'll see what happens.
And sorry, Felix, for the less familiar, can you explain what the cause of this delta is?
So the cause of the delta could be bidder related, that they just haven't honed in the bidder to be as effective. But there's also a pull, right? So these are demand networks, so they want lower prices. So it's in their interests to sell more inventory, right? But that's a bit tinfoil hat. Also, if you think about it, like placements, they force you to be very high. So publishers have been using AdMob placements for years, right? So they have a very good, usually in the higher ends of the waterfall, it's really a lot of placements. So what will happen is AdMob had this weird 3-rule thing that you could only have it. So you usually had Google at very high calls. So an explanation can be that the bidder comes in below those prices and takes up all the low quality inventory. That's the official line, I think. But no one really knows what's going to happen when it's only bidding. I don't think it's going to be quite good, but we'll have to wait and see. Google could put a rabbit out of the hat, but that's why people who are mainly ad revenue driven are exploring other options and are a bit nervous about what will happen on November 1st. Staying on the topic of Google, and stop me if I'm rambling too much. So when they're doing this bidding change, which is a really big change in Q4, which is interesting, the kind of thinking is they want to do the change when eCPMs are super high, so we'll look smaller.
Right.
But also, like I said before, ad monetization is about finding these hacks and using them. So for the last 2 years, the best hack in ad monetization for mobile has been to work with a GAM partner, a Google Ad Manager partner, to basically get Google demand to compete against Google demand. So how I had it described to me was that Google is a huge organization. There's 2 different business units. One is Google Ad Manager and one is AdMob. AdMob is designed like, hey, you go conquer mobile. Like, this is your sphere. And Google Ad Manager's battle cry was everything on desktop is yours. Go ahead. Mobile, they charge publishers 30% to essentially show ads. That's our fee. Google Ad Manager on desktop, 20%. It sounds really great, right? This sounds nothing wrong with this. Nothing's going to go wrong. In practice, in reality, yes, what happened was that the desktop people at Google Ad Manager was like, hey, what if our publishers on desktop also have a mobile ad? Should we not be allowed to show them ads on Ad Manager? And should we really pass this along to another business unit where it doesn't really count towards our KPIs? No. So what happened was they allowed you to show ads with Google Ad Manager in apps. And then that opened up this bridge where you could actually work with a third-party Google Ad Manager reseller. And for the last 2 years, what you could do on mobile is you could have your ad mob demand, and then you could work with a reseller to bring in more Google demand, AdX demand, to compete with Google Ad Mob demand. So you had Google competing against Google in an open auction that they don't know they're competing against Google, and that pushed up prices. And that has been the biggest hack for the last 2 years. It's been amazing. It's a lot of money that's been made this way. So Google has said on the 31st of October, this is done. They're cutting this. On the 31st, the most profitable ad monetization hack currently is getting killed, and they're moving to bidding. So a lot of changes are happening from Google on the 31st. So a lot of people are nervous.
Felix, thinking about big disruptions to ad monetization, one thing that we didn't touch on that I feel like we should at least briefly is we saw at a high level what it did just to monetization, but from the ad mon perspective, when SKAN really hit and the iOS privacy changes, what did that look like in the trenches from the ad mon side? What did you see happen to earnings and how did teams adapt to that?
One word, hilarious.
Why?
On the fateful day when iOS 14.5 rolled out, I was managing quite a big app. It was Tetris, I think, at the time. And I think the opt-in rate there was, high teens, so not very high. For the first 3 weeks, the eCPM delta between IDFA users and non-IDFA users, so tracked versus non-tracked, was 50-60%, massive. And it was just, think stock market, 1920s, collapsing. Everyone's like, no, iOS is dead. And then slowly what happened over the next 3 weeks is that delta went from 60% down to 13%. And then you're like, what's going on here? Okay, all ad networks are doing fingerprinting and probabilistic attribution.
Yep. 100%.
That is only 13% worse. So that was what happened. And that CPM delta, where it stayed fluctuating between 13 and 18% cents. So also, on the back of that Google announcement, what could also happen is that Apple could be announcing that they're cutting fingerprinting and they're going to enforce it. That's another thing that's interesting and happening right now. Yeah. It's a lot of things happening in ad monetization this year.
That's super interesting. It's really interesting to kind of exchange these stories of us focusing on the UA side of the equation, how this moment looked from both sides of the equation. Because on our side, a lot of UA broke. Initially, we saw everyone just bow out of the buying ecosystem. So we scrambled like everyone else, but I think just being a small team and having in-house engineering, we were able to build a really usable solution to work around SKAN and reactivate, ramp back up. We actually spend a lot more on iOS than Android in this post-SKAN period. But the thing that really jumps out to me is you mentioned that 13% delta. I don't know if it's just coincidence, but part of our tool set is in every channel, we look at the delta of users that aren't attributed in one way. So like in a SAN, we're only seeing the opt-in users. So it's a huge delta. We might only capture 20% in a channel like Facebook. And so we'll essentially model out the revenue for those 80% of users in any segment that aren't tracked, so you can still estimate LTV. However, on those reward video networks, we saw almost exactly what you talked about. We see that average of in that 8 to 15% range where the fingerprinting is actually capturing the bulk of them. So you don't actually have to estimate very much there, estimating an extra 500% on a network like Facebook in order to model it back out. So it's super interesting. I've never talked to it
3 weeks. They were just testing in the waters. Will we get busted? Oh, no, this is okay. Okay.
And now it's just a given.
And it's essential for their business model, right?
Well, and for the buyer side too. I don't know the last time I talked to a team that wasn't using fingerprinting on those networks. There could be another big reckoning about that based on some of the recent announcements from Apple.
Apple giveth and Apple taketh away.
I sense a theme.
Awesome. There's a bunch of other stuff that's going on right now in the ad mod ecosystem. Felix, do you want to talk to a few of the other big trends you're currently seeing?
We talked about the main ones.
Amazon, for instance.
Oh, yeah, of course. I forgot that as well. So Amazon has been this kind of little shining beacon that a lot of ad mon managers has invested quite a lot of hope in that will keep competitive. And majority of the demand where you're getting high eCPM in ad monetization on mobile is gaming demand. that pays the highest eCPMs because they have the highest LTVs. So that's just how it works. So they can afford to pay the most to get users. Another thing that also has super high LTVs is e-commerce.
Right.
And who's the king of e-commerce? That's Amazon. I wrote a blog on this. I can't remember what the exact numbers were, but in the last 2 years, Amazon had gone from basically being 10% of the US advertising market to over 21%. So they're clearly having one of those hockey stick moments, and now they're muscling in on mobile. So their first muscle in on mobile was going to Max, and now they're available on a pre-bid solution, which means that they're separate of the header bidding auction and the waterfall, and they just fit in and come up with their highest price, and it goes in to compete with the other highest prices. So that's a really good way of mobile developers getting e-commerce demand. They're really strong on banners. They're moving in right now to interstitials and rewarded, not that strong yet. But it's been a really good way to drive up ad ARPDAUs. The only thing that's annoying with them, it's in a closed beta on mobile. So you have to know someone or really fit with what they're looking for right now. And they're looking for a high overlap with kind of the Amazon ID, so they know who to sell to. But what makes their product really good, and it's typical Jeff Bezos thinking where your margin is my opportunity, it's that they have something that when you start working with Amazon, you get e-commerce demand directly from Amazon, but then you also get a lot of third-party demand from different DSPs. So that's quite normal in ad monetization. If you work with Unity, it's not only Unity demand you're getting, they also have third-party demand to make their demand stack thicker. So like always being able to fill stuff. So how Amazon differs in doing this is that you can sign something called a TAM contract with your top DSPs. And then essentially the margin that Amazon takes for using their plumbing goes down from, I think it's 12 or 18%, but like a high percentage to just a fraction of a cent.
Jeez.
So then you have to invoice the DSP directly, but then the plumbing essentially becomes nearly free. So the key to making money on Amazon Publisher Services is work with your 3 biggest DSPs on a TAM deal. And once you make these TAM deals, like the Amazon publisher share revenue in the US on banners shoots up to maybe from a top 5 network to top 1 or top 2. So they're foregoing that revenue to basically get more share revenue. And once they open up this for general population, they're going to take the mobile market by storm. There's no reason for people not to work with them.
That makes a lot of sense. I love all these tactics. I'm just a nerd, so I love hearing all the nuance of how we actually get this working. I'm going to look a little bit towards the future. You've painted a pretty gloomy picture of the future. Is that the key takeaway? It's just there's an event horizon that's like 3 months away and we don't know? Or do you have any clarity or expectation about what we're going to see beginning of next year, say?
Yeah, these changes happen all the time. So just because there's a crackle in the air and a lot of tumultuous stuff going on, that doesn't mean that we're not going to be okay, right? So things are changing and then we'll have to adapt. And then when this, for example, this GAM hack closes, another one will open. Personally, I'm working on testing with a couple of clients now where I think will be the next kind of things to go. I haven't proven those hypotheses yet, but I definitely think there's something there. And there's some ideas that are quite good. I think the main trends will be, there will be more going direct. Yeah, and the other 2 things is not really I'm ready to talk about yet because it's a bit too soon. So I don't want to...
Secret sauce.
Yeah, no, it's not a secret sauce. It's just not proven yet. So like literally launching an idea with a client in 2 weeks, and that could just either be amazing or just completely bad. So I don't want to say anything to get anyone's hopes up.
Great. So we'll have to have you come back on and give away all your secrets. So that's super, super interesting. I think it's very in line with the way that we think about how to do games growth. We have basically the same methodology. We generally tend to thrive in times of ambiguity and uncertainty because I think we're better than the majority of teams. And if you're screwing with everybody in the ecosystem, then the people who are actually really sophisticated and quick on the feet, like you're able to adapt and take advantage of the tumult in the ecosystem.
I'm a consultant, right? When things are going bad, it's usually when you call in a consultant.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Always reminding the team, no one ever hires us because everything's going great.
Exactly, yeah.
This was awesome, Felix. I feel like I learned a ton today. I will admit, as much as I've been around the industry, AdMon is one of those things where I've had way too much of a blind spot. And I'm really glad you speak very eloquently on it. And I'm really glad we got to give exposure and a little kind of behind the curtains too of how this very important part of our ecosystem works.
Yeah, it's like this one thing where there's only a few of us, and there's not that many people that do ad monetization, but no one really talks about it. And that's always one thing that's bothering me quite a lot, because if you're a small studio, why shouldn't you have access to that information that can unlock more revenue for you? So it's also part of the reason we started the podcast. So it's really been great being here and sharing some stuff.
Yeah, shout out to the 2.5 Gamers podcast.
Yeah, we have now 2/3 of the 2.5 game. Well, not quite. So half. If someone wants to get a hold of you or learn more about your services, how can they do that?
go on my website, felixbraberg.com, or reach out to me on LinkedIn, and you can find my contact details there.
Awesome. Warren, take us out.
Yeah, Felix, thanks again for joining us. This was awesome. As always, the podcast was brought to you by our team here at Upptic. Here at Upptic, we do all things to help games grow. We do full stack growth work, the user acquisition, creative development, ASO. It's all powered by our platform, a bunch of cool tools for growth marketing that we've built in-house and been a key part to our success. We also just license those tools. So if you have an in-house team and are really just looking for efficiencies, that's another way that we often partner with teams. We're always happy to talk to gaming teams looking to improve their growth stack and tactics. And you can reach us through our website. It's upptic.com. That's upptic.com.
Talk soon.